My name is Josh Dallin, and I'm an Extension faculty member in Box Elder County, and it's my pleasure today to introduce our team to you who will be helping to present and facilitate this training. And we hope that it will be a benefit to you and those around you as you go through this training that will be offered. It's my pleasure to introduce our team member, Paige Ray. Paige is a faculty member for Extension down in San Juan County, and we're very grateful to have Paige with us. Paige will be one of our main presenters today and is also an expert when it comes to mental health and stress, and we're very grateful to have her as part of our team. Along those lines, I'd like to also very grateful to introduce Jake Hadfield. Jake is a county extension faculty in Cache County. And Jake is going to be also one of our main presenters today. And in just a moment, we'll turn the time over to him and Paige, but we're very grateful to have them on board. Jake is an agricultural expert and is also very well versed in the farm stress and rural stress and mental health categories when it comes to this presentation and this topic. Callie Ward, we're very grateful to have Callie with us. Callie is an extension faculty member down in Garfield County, and Callie is probably the most hybrid of us all. She is very involved in agricultural related things as well as the home and community pieces. Callie is very diverse in all those different areas, and so we're grateful to have Callie as a part of our team. Before we begin, we're going to turn the time over to Callie here in just a second to introduce some important aspects of our presentation. And last but certainly not least, we have Tasha Howard, and it's my pleasure to introduce her as Tasha Howard for the very first time. She's just recently been married, and we're really excited for Tasha. Tasha is our main content expert when it comes to rural stress and mental health, and Tasha will be helping to field questions and concerns that you might have throughout our presentation. So without further ado, again, we would like to welcome you all. We hope that this will be a wonderful interactive session for you. We will turn the time over to Callie for just a little bit and then go right over to Jake and Paige.
All right, thank you, Josh, for the introduction. So before we begin, I would like to just talk briefly about our evaluation that we're going to be requesting participants to take in. We are a newly developed team. This is a new developing topic, and we're trying to build and improve our impact and our content that we are sharing with producers across the state. And because we are pioneering, we're going to be utilizing you as guinea pigs. And so if at the end of this presentation, if you can take approximately 5 minutes to complete our evaluation, that's going to help us continue to grow and improve our program so that we can make a larger impact across the state. So if you don't mind, watch for me to drop the link in. It's going to be closer to the end. And then we do have some pretty neat incentives for you to opt into the evaluation. This evaluation is completely confidential, and so if you choose to opt in to one of these incentives, it will take you to a separate survey, and we've got a camp type incentive, we've got a farm incentive, and a home decor prize that you will be entered into. So we've got some fun swag if you take that time, and it ultimately the information that you are providing us is going to be invaluable because it's just a great information for us to retain. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Paige and Jake, and I'll send a reminder out for our evaluation at the end.
All right, perfect. Is that sharing, Paige? Can you see that on your screen?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, perfect. Well, it's nice. Thank you guys all for coming. We really appreciate it. We are excited to be here and talk today. Like Josh mentioned, my name is Jake Hadfield. I focus on agriculture up here in Cache County. And I'm excited to be here today with Paige to talk about mental health.
Yeah, and I'm Paige Ray. Like Josh said, I'm from San Juan County, and I do the home and community type work, but I love mental health. And with San Juan County being super rural, rural mental health is a great passion of mine. And so I'm excited also to be here today and to hopefully impart some resources or maybe some information that you have not previously heard. And hopefully we can empower you to go out now and feel comfortable using those resources and that information to help maybe somebody you come in contact with, maybe it's yourself that might need some help. So we're really excited to be here and to do that.
Yeah, perfect. And one of the things, so just a couple housekeeping items before we get going. We know that there's been a lot of Zoom meetings and that virtual formats can be hard and kind of tiring. So we would ask, in this presentation, we try and get some participation going. And we know it's hard with the Zoom meetings. However, we will be asking questions and different things doing different activities when we're going through this presentation. If you would please respond in the chat, that would be great. We like seeing responses, being able to participate with you, even though we're sitting virtually. It's great to hear what people's thoughts are, as well as just answers to certain questions and whatnot. So please comment in the chats. And if you have any questions about anything we cover, please put it in the Q&A section. We actually, Josh, Callie, and Tasha are all going to be watching that and try to answer your questions as we go along, or be able to ask those questions at the end of our presentation. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So I'll turn it over to you, Paige.
All right. So we've titled this presentation, The Biggest Asset is You, because this presentation is really focused on people that are small business owners or ranchers or producers, and that can apply to people in urban settings and small farms as well. The biggest asset in your operation is you. You might think that the biggest asset you have is that nice tractor, or you might think the biggest asset you have is this awesome greenhouse or hoop house, but the biggest asset is you. If you're not functioning completely, fully, if you're not feeling your best, then your business is not going to be its best as well. So that's our whole goal, is to focus on you, or to focus on maybe some people you work with if they're not their best, and help give you resources, help you find things to help you feel your best and to make your business or whatever you're doing in life the best. So this quote came from one of the classes we've taught before. And it says, if a farmer or somebody had a piece of machinery he was working on in his shop fall and break his leg and pin him under it, he'd call a neighbor to come with his big loader and lift the machine up to free him. He'd call his wife to get an ambulance coming. He'd call family or helpers to take over while he went for medical care. But in the midst of a financial, marital, or emotional crisis, he could be paralyzed for calling for help. So why is seeking help for a mental health issue different than seeking help for a physical issue? If you guys would think about that and maybe put some thoughts in the chat, that would be awesome. Why is seeking help for a mental health issue, or like this quote says, financial, marital, harder than seeking help for a physical issue? Stigma, that's a really good answer. Yep. Thanks, Tasha, for putting that in the chat again. Yeah, I think stigma is a really, really big barrier for a lot of people. They worry about what other people are going to think. They worry that it's weird to have these issues, or that people are going to think they're weird. Exactly. Another one that we get a lot. Oh, Abby, for me, seeking help for a mental health issue felt like I had failed somehow. I felt I should be able to manage and control it on my own. I think a lot of people feel that way. Coming from a rural community, especially, a lot of people feel like they need to be the strong one. They don't need help. They're the people that can help themselves. That's great. Not feeling like anyone can help. Lots of medical facilities, not as much mental health resources. People in rural areas, seem to be naturally more self-reliant, and so it feels like we should be able to handle it on our own. Those are great. You don't want to admit, or people might not know how to respond. That's a really good one, and that's why we're here today, is people may not know how to respond, and so we're hoping that we can empower at least you in this presentation to know how to respond. And then a big one that we always get is mental health issues are a lot harder to see than physical health issues. Like if you saw somebody, on crutches struggling to open a door, you'd run up and help them. But you can't necessarily always see somebody that's suffering from depression or has anxiety. It's a lot harder to see. So it's hard to help. So thank you for putting that in. That's great. So our class overview, and what are we actually going to talk about today? We're going to talk about stress because I feel like we all have stress. We're going to talk about the signs and symptoms of stress and some signs and symptoms of mental health issues. We're going to talk about what the difference is between stress and a mental health issue. We're going to talk about anxiety. We're going to talk about living with mental health struggles. We're going to talk about depression and suicide because I feel like that is probably the biggest one that people think of when we think about mental health. And then at the very end, and if this is the only thing you take away from our presentation, we're going to talk about how you can respond to somebody and the resources that you can find to help somebody suffering with a mental health issue.
Perfect. Thanks, Paige. Now, I kind of wanted to come in and discuss why we are doing this. So I will tell you that originally this curriculum was established to target specifically rural communities, those communities outstretched. Now, I know we're in the urban and small farm conference right now, so you guys might not all be on rural communities, but I do think it's important to note that this applies to all of us in any stretch or way. One of the reasons that we are doing this, though, is that about 20% of our nation's population lives in rural areas. That's nearly 1/5 of the entire population. In these rural areas, there is greater isolation. Now, I would dare to say that it's not just in the rural areas, however. Those who do a lot of farm work probably notice that just due to the work that they do, there is a lot of isolation that happens a lot of the times where people are out working by themselves, working on their own projects. And sometimes farming is just not that profitable. So you end up working alone because you can't afford to pay either a hired hand or someone to help you. We also see that depending on how the economy is and in different areas, we see a high elevated stress levels. We also know that farming is hard work, so there is a lot of physical stress that comes with that. And stress levels can come from injuries, different components, different things to that effect. Now, one of the main reasons we wanted to target this presentation is to focus on a community mentality. Now, I know that all of you are not in a rural area, but I do think of the farm group, especially like urban and small farms, as well as just farms in general. I think that in and of itself is a community. And I think it's important that we have this community mentality where if we can help one person gain knowledge or help one person know how to respond to mental health illness, it can help have one more person who is available there to be able to help and know how to help in situations that can be dire. So moving on and talking about some of the struggles we have with mental health is we have to think about barriers that create problems with us getting better mental health. Now, honestly, some of what you guys have said in the chat has been perfect on this. We talked about there's a lot of medical facilities, but there may not necessarily be a lot of mental health facilities to be able to help. We also talked about some of the barriers of just being able to access service, having access available. Some of the things that we've heard as we've done these trainings is that there isn't farm specific mental health resources. Many times farmers and ranchers go into these mental health meetings, but the people don't understand them because they don't have a farm or agricultural background. We also see that the acceptance of the illness is a struggle and that it's not accepted everywhere. And this goes right in line with the stigma behind mental health. And before I get into this, Callie, in our last meeting, made a great comment about this, talking about stigma and its effect. And I was wondering if she'd be willing to share that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Josh had said, I am kind of a hybrid. I grew up on a cattle ranch in Millard County, and then I live in Garfield County, and we have a small farm. We've got a hoop house, and we've got several small animals, as well as my kids are heavily involved in the 4-H and FFA programs. And with this demographic, I often think of individuals that I work with directly or individuals in my family, and that the stigma is real. I noticed Brent's comment that you can self-diagnose a broken leg. And a lot of it comes from this vision of what the producers might feel themselves as strong, independent, and asking for help is a weakness. And so how can we overcome this stigma? And I think it's just opening up the discussion and realizing a lot of producers are going through the same thing. They go through the fluctuating markets. They go through the terrible and awful weather. They're going through the same droughts. And so I think just breaking down these barriers and these walls, we're going to help remove that stigma and just open the conversation between our producers. Again, reflecting specifically to a certain individual I know, they often go for coffee on Sunday morning, and that's kind of their mental health is that's where they can talk about this and kind of overcome it. And so I think as we progress, it's just taking down that stigma and making that connection between producers that we are in this together, and you might notice that your neighbor or your partner is actually going through the same thing. So
Thanks, Callie. That was perfect. And I think that's important to realize as well, is just as Callie mentioned, that there is that stigma that is there. I think we see this especially in smaller communities. I think that that stigma sometimes can be a little bit stronger, but it's true in our urban and all communities in general that there can kind of be this stigma. Now, just to define stigma for all of you, which you all probably know it, but I always like a definition just to help me. Just specifically, it's a mark of disgrace associated with a particular situation. Now, a lot of times I think we need to think about what leads to stigma in our communities. What kind of things actually lead to these stigmas? Now, I will tell you, as we've done this presentation, some of the things that we've learned is in overcoming stigma, just as Callie stated in her comment, is a lot of times that overcoming that stigma comes through knowledge and resources, as well as sharing stories. I will tell you, in a couple of meetings that this team has been involved in, we've had some experiences where, farmers or ranchers were willing to share experiences of struggles with mental health, whether it was themselves or someone they knew. And by sharing those stories, it really opened up the conversation about having mental health and talking about it seriously. And that's one reason that we open up the chat feature on this virtual format, is because we want you guys to participate as well. We want you guys to be right along with us so that we can, hear what people have to say about mental health and potential resources that they might also have that are available to help others. With that, I'm actually going to turn the time over to Paige here. She's going to start talking about stress and going into that in a little more detail. If I can get it to slide. There it goes.
So I feel like we all experience stress, but I like to have this illustration. So imagine we were face to face and I was standing in front of you and I had my arm outstretched, and on the palm of my hand was a full water bottle. How long do you think I could hold that water bottle up? Just looking at my face. How long do you think I could hold that water bottle? You can put an answer in the chat if you want to. It's okay if you think I'm a wimp. It's okay if you think I can do it a long time. 5 minutes. Thanks, Stacy. So in relation to me, 1 minute. Thanks, Josh. That's probably closer to what it actually is. In relation to me holding up the water bottle, think about yourself and think about how long you could hold up the water bottle. Some of you could probably hold it up longer than I could, right? But if you saw me holding up this water bottle and I needed help, what are some ways that you could help me hold up this water bottle? Anybody have any ideas? Dump some of the water out? Good. Thanks, Tasha. Maybe somebody else could help hold my arm up, and help me hold that water bottle. Dump some of the water out. Good. So think about that water bottle like stress. We all handle stress differently. We all may have the same amount of stress, but some of us can hold it up longer than others, or some of us need help when others don't. So we all experience stress. And stress is a physical, chemical, or emotional factor that causes bodily or mental tension. Again, it affects everybody, and not all stress is bad. I always like to say that one because sometimes stress is good. I work under deadlines very, very well. When I stress for a deadline, I get some of my best work done. So not all stress is bad. But it's when it becomes long-term stress and it starts affecting more things, that's when it starts to become unhealthy. And then when it starts to become maybe unmanageable, that's also a time that you might start to think, this might become a little bit more unhealthy, or we might need to look at different ways. So if you'll go to the next slide, Jake, let's talk about how we can manage our stress, or how we can make it so it doesn't get too far and turn into something that affects our lives. So one of the biggest things I like to talk about when it comes to stress management is those healthy habits that we can develop to de-stress. But I want you guys in the chat to put, what are some things that you guys do to manage your stress? Because stress management looks different for everybody. When you guys are stressed out, how do you manage that so it doesn't go too far? Music. It's a great one. Alone time. That's a really good one too. Reading, crosswords, baths, Sudoku, hiking, gardening, spending time with animals. Yep, those are all great answers. I'm glad you guys can answer those that quickly, because sometimes when you have that stress, or when there's stress in your life, it's really hard to see past it. So if you have these responses or these things that you know help you all ready to go, you can employ those and help you manage that stress so that it doesn't become unmanageable or start affecting your life more than normal stress should. So when does someone need to seek professional or other help for stress, or maybe it's starting to turn into a mental health issue? We like to say it's when it interferes with your life, your love, and your work. So if it's interfering with how you live, if it's interfering with your relationships or your job, then it might be time to seek some professional or outside help. And then stress versus mental illness, again, just to drive this home. Stress is a normal response. We all have stress, but when it isn't managed, or it triggers more than a normal reaction, or it lasts more than 2 weeks, then that might be some time that we need to start looking at getting some professional help or some outside help, because our normal de-stress type things, or our normal stress responses aren't helping anymore. So it might be time to get us some professional help. So when stress turns into more than we can manage, it might be a mental health issue. If Jake will go to the next slide, these are some signs and symptoms of mental health issues. So it can have physical signs and symptoms, it can be emotional, it can be behavioral signs and symptoms, and it can affect our relationships. So in your own situations, in your lives, what have you guys seen this look like? Has anybody experienced this with a family member or maybe a coworker? What have you seen that it looks like? I know with friends that I've had, I feel like a lot of times people think mental health issues are people that just sit in the dark and cry all the time. But I've seen friends pull away. I've seen them just not be interested in what they used to do. All those types of things. Crying easily or wanting to yell. I've seen people get easily irritated. So not necessarily crying, but they're easily irritated. They cancel lots of plans. That's a great one. Anybody else? Sleeping late or later, sleep problems. Yep, that's a big one. That's a really big one. So I think we've all seen these signs and symptoms. One thing I want to stress though with this class is a lot of times people have asked me, well, my friend seems to be sleeping a lot more than usual. Maybe they are depressed. And this class is not so that you can go start diagnosing people. This class is an awareness. You can be aware. You can notice these signs and symptoms and then be ready if somebody comes to you for help. Or if you notice that it's starting to interfere with everything in their life, you can maybe with whatever relationship you have with them, you can go to them and see if they might need some help. So again, you're not using these to diagnose, you're just using these as an awareness step and to be aware so that when somebody comes to you for help or when you can offer help, you're ready. So I love to say that because I've had a lot of people ask me, well, you know, now we can go around diagnosing people, but that's not what this class is for. So then we want to talk about stress versus mental illness, if you'll go to the next slide. This is just kind of a side-by-side comparison so you can see it, because again, we all have stress and some people handle it a lot better than others, or some people are able to handle a lot more than others. So stress is our response to an external cause, and mental health illness is a response to something that's internal. Stress is easy to manage with coping skills. It can be positive and everyone has it, and mental health illnesses are diagnosable by a professional. And then 27% of adults experience the onset of a mental health illness each year, but less than 25% of adults each year seek treatment for mental health. Why do you think that is? Why do you think only about 25% or less than 25% seek help? Does anybody have any thoughts they can put in the chat? Stigma. Another one we see a lot, and you guys kind of touched on this at the beginning, is people just don't know where to go. They don't know where to go to get help. So again, the whole goal of our class or this presentation is to help you get some resources or to know where you can go to get help. Cost is actually a really big one. A lot of people don't seek help because they worry about the cost. Yep. It can be overwhelming to look for somebody who you mesh with. That's a really good one, Becky. Sometimes people don't want to look around, and the first person you find is not always maybe the best fit for you. Time, yep. And time's kind of a sad one because, again, title of our presentation, the biggest asset is you. You need to take care of yourself. But yeah, some people think they don't have enough time. Those are really great answers. So again, just be thinking about these, how we can combat these barriers, the time, the stigma, the cost even, and being able to find where to go. So I'm going to turn the time back over to Jake, and he is going to talk a little bit more specifically now about anxiety.
Perfect. Thank you, Paige. So we're switching gears a little bit, but I don't know that we're switching gears all the way, because in some ways anxiety and stress are closely related. So it's hard to say that they can have very similar, I guess, feelings or emotions behind them as well. One way I like to think about it is stress for me a lot of times is if I'm like in the middle of, let's say, I don't know, I'm going to say herding cattle. I can get stressed because I'm trying to get through it, trying to get it done, trying to get the job done overall. Anxiety is me like staying up all night because I'm afraid I left the gate open in a lot of ways. So it's, to me, there's differences, and that might just be a personal thing. But in that same breath, I do think it's important to notice differences. So it's easy for all of us to have feelings of stress and anxiety. But again, like we've mentioned, once this becomes, when you can tell that this is becoming an issue is when it's starting to affect those three factors: your work, your love, and your life specifically. And so that is when it becomes really important to seek help. When we think of anxiety, a lot of times the disorders we're going to think of is disorders such as specific phobias, social anxiety, PTSD, generalized anxiety, panic disorder, and OCD. All of these deal with anxiety in one form or the other. People who tend to have a high level of anxiety over a long period of time also tend to show signs of depression. So oftentimes these two symptoms or these two issues can go hand in hand with each other. So one activity that I want to share with you guys is, when you think of anxiety, I want you to think about, where do symptoms occur? So I drew this guy up here. He's just here to be kind of a picture diagram. But I want you to think, when you think of anxiety, where on this diagram do you think it occurs? So for example, if you were to break your leg, you would say, oh, I broke my leg. That's where the pain is located. Now you might have some headaches or something else just from all the stress and everything, but your pain's located there. So now I want you to go ahead and think about, and you can put in the chat as well, when you think of anxiety, where do you feel the symptoms occur? Wow, that was quick. Stomach, head, yep. Chest area, yeah. Hard to breathe, palms, perfect. Those are all great answers right there. And that is true. And I think everyone feels it a little different. I see mind, headaches, thoughts, back tension, tightness. Yes. So for instance, I do think we all feel it differently, because for me specifically, one thing that I see is my heart starts beating like crazy when I get anxiety. Like my heart just starts to pump and pump and pump like crazy. And I can just feel it almost coming out of my chest. However, my wife, when she gets anxiety, her nerves are shot and her stomach just starts to hurt. She starts to get sick to her stomach really easily. And so there are a lot of differences. Some people experience severe headaches. They can feel that. And others just feel general pains and aches just because they're holding so much tension in their joints that they feel it in their back, their ankles. And I mean, each individual is going to feel it differently, but I think it's important that we visualize this anxiety as if it was a physical symptom, so that we can be able to start thinking of it as having implications into our lives. So some of the signs and symptoms that we see, oops, I went too far. Hold on. Okay. So for instance, physical symptoms that we see, like we talked about most of these kind of dizziness, nausea, upset stomach, muscle aches, and pains. Now, if we're thinking behavioral, some of the things that we notice with anxiety is people actually tend to start avoiding things. This can be because of the high level of stress and anxiety. It can be because of phobias. We also can see that obsessive or compulsive behaviors start to happen. This is similar to, having a fear, like phobic behaviors, as well as just general distress in social situations. Psychologically, we see that a lot of the anxiety comes from an unrealistic fear or excessive worry. And even though it's unrealistic, that fear is still there. There's mind racing, minds going blank, decreased concentration and memory, as well as irritability and fatigue. And so these are some of the signs and symptoms that we can see overall when we're thinking about anxiety, or when we're noticing a change in someone who may have anxiety. Now, again, mental illness in everyday life, one of the things we want to think about is, how does having a mental health issue affect your life, love, and work? So this next question, I want you to put answers in the chat. How would someone who is affected by paraplegia be treated differently than someone who is affected by PTSD? So go ahead and share your responses in the chat, what you think would be the differences. Oh, I keep going ahead and I don't know how I'm doing that. Okay, so just to be sure, okay, one is visible and the other isn't. That is very true. And I think that's very true. And so some of the things that we've talked about and as we've shared this presentation across the state, is one of the things is like, you can imagine that the neighbors, with the paraplegia, they're going to be bringing meals over, doing different things. But oftentimes that PTSD just isn't visible. You can't see it. So that person might not get any care because people don't know it's happening. They don't know it's affecting. However, I mean, paraplegia is serious and has serious effects on someone's life, but PTSD can also really impact people's lives. It can cause really bad marriage issues. It can cause different kinds of work issues as well. And so there are impacts that are still happening, even though it is not visible. And so we're gonna go ahead and do an activity. I'm gonna turn it over to Paige to have her do the activity and explain it to you. So.
Okay, so I really like this activity because it kind of shows, if you've never experienced a mental illness, it kind of shows how mental illnesses maybe compare, and I hate to say that, but compare to something physical that you can see. I do want to preface this activity with saying that I'm not saying, Jake's not saying, our team is not saying that having one of these is worse than having another one of these. This is an activity that comes from Mental Health First Aid, which was written by the Council on Behavioral Health. So I didn't make up this activity. But I want you to think about, or this is called disability weights. So I want you to look at these, and I want you to put all of these illnesses or diseases in order of what would affect your life, your daily life the most, to what would affect your daily life the least. So I'm going to give you just a minute or a little bit more than a minute. I'm going to give you a little bit to think about these illnesses that we have listed. How would they affect your life? Which ones would affect your life the most, to which ones would affect your life the least? So put that in order. Okay, as you guys are kind of thinking about this, if you want to put in the chat, which one do you think would affect your life the least out of this list? And least. Thanks, Josh. Josh put for the most effect on your life would be paraplegia, the least would be moderate depression. So does anybody else have any thoughts as to what they think? Most would be paraplegia, least would be low back pain. Thanks, Jenny. Carrie agrees with Jenny. Good. Paraplegia, most, low back pain, least. Most is severe dementia, least is gingivitis. Okay. So again, I do have what I'm going to call an answer key, but I'm not saying that if you have these, this is where you fit, because these affect everybody differently. But this is just kind of a comparison, just so you can see, again, where these mental health illnesses rank, maybe compared to, or how they affect your life compared to these physical illnesses. So do you have the answers? There you go. Thanks, Jake. So the most would be severe dementia, then severe schizophrenia, then severe depression, then the chronic bronchitis or emphysema, then severe PTSD. Number 6 would be paraplegia. Number 7 would be severe vision loss, severe asthma, moderate depression, non-invasive breast cancer, epilepsy, low back pain, uncomplicated diabetes, and then the least amount on your daily life would be gingivitis. So that's just kind of a comparison. Everybody, whenever we do this activity, gets super surprised at some of these. So again, I want to state that I'm not saying if you have any of these, you're less ill than others, you're more ill than others. It's just how this affects your everyday daily life. And again, I think we are a lot kinder or a lot more helpful to people that we can see. So a lot of you put paraplegia as the most effective on your daily life. Paraplegia is definitely something we can see and definitely something we can help out with. I think when we encounter somebody with severe dementia or severe schizophrenia, we may not always know how to help them. We may not always be able to see it. I've had grandparents with dementia, and they're sometimes really good at hiding it. You can tell they don't know who you are, but they're really, really good at hiding it. And so it's hard. It is very, very hard to help people with mental illnesses. But if you encounter somebody experiencing one of these, I would hope that you would help them or treat them just like you would somebody that has paraplegia or cancer, because we all need help. We all experience things, and we just need to help each other. Carrie put in the chat, she can recover from depression, but not paraplegia. That's true. Depression, you can recover from it, and you would never recover from paraplegia. But a lot of times, again, people seek help for paraplegia, or they get treatment and training so that they learn to live with it. Whereas a lot of times people suffer with depression without getting help. And so somebody with paraplegia lives a lot better life than somebody with depression, because the paraplegic person has sought out help, they've learned to live with it, and they're doing okay. But somebody that hasn't sought out help for depression is living with it, and it could be so hard for them. Somebody asked a question in the Q&A, I think it was Rachel. She asked how to know when normal versus next level for mental illnesses. And again, we go back to that, when it's affecting your life, your love, and your relationships and your work, and then kind of your timing of emotions. If it's lasted for longer than 2 weeks, it's probably starting to become a little more severe. And if your relationships and stuff are changing. So how do we know when it's next level? It's when it's affecting longer than it should, and it's affecting more aspects of your life than it should. So yeah, thank you, Carrie, for putting that in the chat. and being willing to share that. So we're going to talk a little bit about depression because, again, depression, I think when people think of mental illnesses, depression is probably the first one you think of. There's various forms. There's major depressive, bipolar, postpartum, and seasonal. And I think we've heard of a lot of these. And then again, when signs and symptoms last for more than 2 weeks and affects your ability to live, work, and love, that's probably when you need to start seeking some help. I know that we all have times in our lives when we get sad. If something maybe at work doesn't go your way, you're probably sad for a day, maybe even a week, but it's not depression until it starts to interfere with everything in your life. So you may notice somebody in your life that's sad. You may notice they're sad for a couple weeks, or, maybe you notice they're sad for a couple weeks, but they're still able to work. They're still fairly okay with everything. They're okay with their family. Their relationships aren't suffering. They're probably not depressed. They probably just had something sad happen and they're going to be okay. But again, when you notice these signs and symptoms that are lasting for more than 2 weeks, or it's affecting more than it should in their lives, that's probably when it is depression, and you should maybe start seeking some professional help. And then the signs and symptoms of depression. There's physical signs and symptoms like lack of energy, unexplained aches and pains. There's behavioral, which a lot of you mentioned before, crying, withdrawing, lack of interest in things. And then there's psychological. They're sad, they're irritable, they have thoughts of death or suicide, they have a feeling that they're hopeless, nothing's ever going to get better. So these can be some of the signs and symptoms, and there's lots of different signs and symptoms. But again, keeping in mind that if it's starting to affect their life more than it should, if it's starting to affect their ability to live, work, and love, that's when it's probably time to get some help. So we're going to talk a little bit about suicide, and I know that this can be a trigger for people. And so if this is a trigger for you, this is the time that you can step away from our presentation. That is totally okay, because some people have had to deal with this, some people haven't. And if it's a trigger and it's hard for you to deal with, please feel free to just kind of step away at this point. But it's important to talk about, because I feel like suicide is a scary thing. It's a big thing and it's a scary thing for people. And so with us talking about it, it kind of brings it more to light, and we bring more awareness to people. So we are going to talk a little bit about it. So these risks listed here, these are risk factors for suicide. It doesn't mean that somebody that has like the gender that completes suicide more, or the age that completes suicide more. It doesn't mean that just because that they're in that age and that gender that they're going to complete suicide. It just means that these are the people that are more likely to complete suicide. So research has shown that there's a certain age, a certain gender that is more likely to attempt and complete suicide. If they have the means, they're more likely. If they've had a previous attempt, if they have an organized plan, if they use alcohol, and if they have lower social support. Research has shown that these are the risk factors for somebody attempting and possibly completing suicide. So the warning signs of suicide: if they are threatening to kill themselves, if they're seeking access to means, if they're researching suicide methods, if they're talking about death and suicide, if they're having reckless behavior, if they withdraw, if they have dramatic changes in mood, and if they're giving away their items. One of the warning signs of suicide that people find really interesting, if they've never had any experience with it, is this dramatic change in mood. A lot of times people think that those that attempt suicide are just super depressed, like they are so down. If you saw them on the street, you would just see like a lump. But that's actually not true some of the time. Some of the time, people that have decided to attempt suicide are a lot happier. Research has found that people that have decided to end their life, they kind of have a weight taken off their shoulders. They have a plan, they have a way to get out of their pain, and they actually become happier. So I've heard of a lot of instances of people saying, you know, they were depressed, but we thought they were fine because they were a lot happier, but ultimately they completed suicide. And it just leaves people with a lot of questions and a lot of confusion, because a lot of times the dramatic change in mood or behavior can be a positive thing. So it's really interesting to know that. And then because we are trying to tackle this in rural areas, here's some suicide facts from rural areas. So rural areas have higher rates of completion. Men living in rural areas are 2 times more likely to complete suicide than those not. And then most suicides in rural areas continue to be completed by firearms, just because that's the easiest means and access that people have. So now that we've kind of talked about those warning signs, Jake is, oh, actually, no, me. I'm going to keep talking about how to respond to suicide. So again, this can be super uncomfortable for people, but I think it's so important to do, because if you're prepared, it's going to make in this situation, if you ever find yourself in a situation with somebody contemplating suicide, if you're prepared and confident, it's going to make them more confident and you're going to be able to help them better. So I want you to take a minute. It's going to go silent. And I want you, if you're next to somebody, please ask directly these questions. And the person does not need to respond. You just need to face them and ask these questions and practice doing it. If you're not, please just say these out loud to yourself. So first of all, are you having thoughts of suicide? And then are you thinking about killing yourself? So please take a minute. If you have somebody next to you, ask them these questions. If you don't, just say them out loud, because practice makes prepared. So again, I hope you took the time to actually have those words come out of your mouth, because as awkward and kind of shocking as it might be if you've never had to do this before, the more that you can do it and be comfortable, the more prepared that you're going to look, and the more comfortable that you're going to make somebody in this situation if you ever have to do that. So if they respond yes to either of those questions or to both, here's what you can do. You can keep them safe, you can stay with them, and you can assist them through the crisis. You can ask them if they have decided how they will kill themselves, ask them if they have decided when they will kill themselves, and ask them if they have collected the means to kill themselves. In one of our classes that we've done with this before, one of the participants shared that they didn't really know what to do, but they found a friend that was in the middle of trying to attempt suicide, and they stayed on the phone with them. And then all of a sudden the phone clicked and he could not get a hold of him again. So he called the police and told the police where the friend was. And the friend later thanked him for getting him the help that he needed. So stay with them and try to help keep them safe. The other thing that I like to point out is sometimes you may not feel prepared to deal with this situation. And that's totally okay. But it is your responsibility to get them to safety. So if you do need to hand it off to somebody else that has more training than you, please hand it off to somebody, but do not leave them alone. Try to get them to help. And if you feel uncomfortable, just get them to another level of help, and then that's what you can do. So again, the more that you're prepared for this situation, the better that it's going to be. You can be reassuring and confident, and you can help somebody. And then the last thing I want to talk about on this slide is a lot of times I get, well, if I talk about suicide to somebody that's depressed, I might put it in their mind. That's been proven not true. Just because you talk about it doesn't mean it's going to bring it up in their mind and then they're going to try. You need to talk about it. We need to talk about it and bring it out into the light so that it's not awkward, it's not uncomfortable, and they can feel comfortable talking to you about it. I want to ask Tasha to share an experience that she had in responding to a situation like this.
Thanks, Paige. And before I tell the story, I kind of want to preface it that the reason I'm telling this story is to illustrate those 2 points that Paige just talked about. one, that it's okay to hand that off to somebody else when you may not be the best person to address the suicidal crisis yourself. And two, to follow your gut instincts, because that can help save lives. So a couple weeks ago, I was driving home and I was getting onto the interstate. And while I was getting onto the interstate, it was one of those entrance to the interstate where there's kind of a bridge and overpass. And I noticed that there's a car pulled over on the side of the overpass, which that's not unusual. But the unusual thing was that there's two people who were outside of the car sitting on the overpass together. One was actually standing right in front of the other person, but one person was sitting. They were some younger. They could have just been teenagers, you know, hanging out, having fun. That was the place they decided to stop their car. That, you know, long road trip, whatever. But something just didn't sit right with me in the situation of seeing this this person sitting on top of the overpass with their feet kind of hanging down towards the interstate. And so because I didn't know the people, I wasn't familiar with them, what I decided to do was just call 911 directly and let them know what was going on, where it was, and what my concerns were. And because, again, I didn't know the people, but I felt like something needed to happen, I was able to call the authorities who came out, and they were able to handle the situation with that training. And so again, I kind of tell this story to illustrate those 2 points that Paige is talking about. It's okay to hand that off to other people when you may not be the right person to have this conversation. And then two, to follow your instincts. If you have a feeling that maybe this is something you need to bring up with a family member or friend, or somebody you've noticed is struggling, a coworker, whatever that situation may be, to follow those instincts and have this conversation. They may very well say no. And that's kind of the best option, right? They say no, and you kind of go about, okay, well, just so you know, I'm here to support you. If that ever is the situation that you find yourself in. So that's kind of why I share that story. So thanks, Paige, for letting me share that.
Of course.
Okay, perfect. Now, here we're coming up a little bit on the end, but this slide's really important and it's really critical because we've been talking about some of these things already, and this kind of sums it up as well as helps us to know how to handle these situations. So this slide is how to help, what your role is. And so first of all, the 3 words we've chosen is ask, respond, connect. And so the first thing you want to do, as Paige has talked about, is you want to ask people, you want to talk to people. You know, if it's necessary, you need to ask those direct suicide questions, but that might not be what's necessary. It might be asking how someone is doing, how you can help them, or if you can help them. And you might even be asking what they are going through right now to kind of help understand where they're coming from. After you've asked, and if you determine there's a problem, it's important to respond. And I think Tasha just illustrated this perfectly, is, you know, you want to respond to them appropriately. Like she said, she didn't know these people, so she decided to turn it over to the appropriate sources or the services that needed to be. And so that might be your approach. If it's a family member or friend, you might approach a little different. You might dive a little further into what is going on with them. And you might also be following up with them as necessary. You might be, you know, trying to help them connect with resources and see how they are doing with those resources. And like I said, the last one here is connect. You want to connect these people to resources. And basically you want to just make sure that there's a plan that they have to be able to help them and to ensure that they will receive help. Now, I wanted to ask Josh to share an experience he had with this and kind of talk about how he went through these steps during this time. So.
Thank you, Jake. You know, to give a little bit of background, we had some of our agricultural producers in our county that reached out and asked if we had any information on training for these subject matters that we've talked about today. And I, at that time, was very unversed in any of this subject matter. And so we reached out to Tasha and Paige and invited them to come up and do what Paige has already referenced, which is the mental health first aid training. And I sat as a participant in the training, and I thought, well, this is good information. It's interesting, but I probably won't ever be able to use it. And what was really interesting, and I want to refer back to the slide that Paige told us to utilize to run those things through our head and say out loud those questions. I participated in the training and I did those things. And again, in my mind, thought I'm never going to use these. Well, it wasn't but maybe 2 to 3 weeks later that I sat in the front room of my parents' home with my little brother. And he looked across the room very troubled and explained to me that he was having a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, and that he wanted to end his life. And I was able to utilize those tools that Tasha and Paige taught me to be able to talk to my brother and ask him if he had a plan, and ask him what if he was really contemplating killing himself, and go through those steps that they taught me. And I was then able to utilize the tools that they gave me to keep him safe and to find him the help that he needed. It turned out that he had been seeking help for quite some time. The stigma of mental health worried him so badly he didn't want to mention anything to anyone. He was going to medical doctors that were just prescribing pills to him, and he was trying to do it on his own, but he wasn't going to the right resources. He wasn't going to the right places. And thanks to Paige and Tasha, I knew where to try and look for those right places, and we were able to help him and get him the help that he needed, and find out a lot of things once we went to those right resources that ended up being able to prescribe him with the right types of treatments and to actually diagnose him properly with what was going wrong. And so I guess my testimonial today is that whether you yourself are struggling with some of these areas, or you know someone that's struggling with these areas, or even you don't know anyone at this time that's struggling in these areas, this subject matter is so important, because the things that are being taught to you today, you'll never know when they might come into play. You know, whether you're like Tasha driving down the road and seeing somebody you might not know, or being like myself and sitting in the front room with your brother. Those are times that these things are so vital. And so I hope that sharing that with you helps to shed the light of how important these things really are.
Perfect. Thank you, Josh, for sharing that. We really appreciate that. So last but not least, to help, just solidify everything we've talked about, we want to provide some resources for you that are available. And I'm going to kind of talk about each of these resources just really quick. We do get a lot of questions on these resources. Feel free to ask about them if you have more questions, and we're happy to answer anything about these. But first of all, one good resource can be your primary care physician. They actually have evaluations and things you can fill out, and they can help you find mental health services if you're able, after taking evaluations, and they can be able to help you find the correct resources. There are also mental health professionals. These would be kind of local to your area. You kind of have to find them, but they can be able to help as well. One thing we've talked about is the mental health first aid curriculum, which is right here. This curriculum is really good. It really trains people on it, and there are really good resources available in that as well. This website link right here is actually to the National Institute of Mental Health, and they have kind of little fact sheets or publications here that talk about how to handle stress, how to handle anxiety, how to handle these things a little bit on your own. This website, the nationalcouncil.org/providers, allows you to be able to find mental health professionals near you, or mental health providers that are in your local area. Now, one thing that I want each one of you to do in this meeting is I want you to pull out your phone, and I've done this, is pull out your phone, and I want you to put in the crisis text line here. So this crisis text line allows people to text if they're struggling with suicidal thoughts or whatnot. All they have to do is text home to 741-741, and they'll receive a text back. Now, one of the reasons this text line has been so good is because some people think it's too daunting to call those resources. And so people can actually text in for help. So please put the 741-741 number in your phone. While you're doing that, you can also put the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline into your phone. This number here, 1-800-273-8255. Both these lines are running 24/7 and have people who can provide suicide help to those who are in need. So please put these numbers in your phone. If there's one thing you do in this presentation, that would be the thing I would say to do, just so you have access to these resources. Now, last but not least, one of the things we talked about is that there had been a struggle in mental health in rural and agricultural communities in not having farm-specific resources. There are farm-specific resources being developed. This resource, in fact, I think is up and running. Tasha can clarify if I'm wrong. It is up and running right now. So Farm Aid is a great resource, and there are other resources being developed as we speak that should be soon, be coming soon, is basically what I'm saying. And so be on the lookout for those other resources and be looking for those things. With that, I think we will go ahead and go into questions. If you have any questions, we can answer those. I'm going to allow anyone on the team can answer these questions. So if whoever wants to answer them, we can go ahead and do that. I'm seeing a lot on the chat here, so let's see. Oh, perfect. That it was just those filling it out.
While we're waiting for some questions to come in, Callie, would you like to take the floor one more time and remind everyone where they can find that resource for survey?
Yes, thanks, Josh. So I will drop it in the chat, both in the question and answer and the chat, a direct link to our evaluation. Again, it just takes about 5 minutes, and your feedback on this course is going to help us improve our reach and our resources available to providing this information to our agriculture producers, individuals in rural as well as urban. We ultimately want to get this information out to those who can utilize it, and hopefully that will benefit everybody within the state. So again, I will drop that in the chat. So please make sure if you've got time to fill out our evaluation.
Again, we'd really like to thank everyone for joining this session, and special thanks to our team. As I mentioned, this team not only are great friends and colleagues, but have made an influence in my life by providing this information. And I really hope that it's been as beneficial to you as it was and has been for me. And again, as Callie mentioned, we can't emphasize enough, if you would please just let us know your thoughts. We want to make sure that we tailor this to the ability to help everyone and make it so that it's the most effective. Special thanks to Paige and Jake, our lead facilitators, to Callie for being here to help with responses and with our survey, and to Tasha, our main expert, who's I've noticed has been fielding questions and responses throughout the duration of this. Again, we will remain on here for another few minutes if there's questions that you might have for us. We'll also go ahead and put our email contact information. Perhaps maybe you'd like to contact us individually at a different time frame for more resources or content information. We'll type our emails and information into the chat. We'll wait for those questions. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. All right, for those attendees still on board with us, we're going to hang around for about 3 more minutes. We are definitely open for any questions that you might have. Again, Callie has put that survey resource link in the chat box there for you to be able to find and fill out. We would encourage you to do that. We'd also encourage you to make sure to copy down all the resources that were shared in the chat and our email information if there's any time that you feel like you would need some more information or some more direct assistance. We're happy to do that. If there's no further questions, we'll go ahead and end in about 2 more minutes. Again, we thank you so much for joining us today and thank the team for being a part of this to deliver this important message. Thank you. Okay, everybody, we've reached about 2:15. We're going to go ahead and end this session. And we again appreciate everybody for attending. Please make sure to reach out to us at any later dates if there's any concerns or questions that you might have. Again, we hope that you guys have a great rest of your week. And on behalf of the team, we thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thanks.